All right, everyone. It is 2 o'clock, so I'll go ahead and get us started. Good afternoon. I am Taylor Post, Swiftland's office manager, and I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Turning Patrons into Cheerleaders, and today's presenter, Linda Bruno. Linda Bruno has been developing and conducting training workshops for libraries and other organizations for more than 15 years. She offers workshops on topics ranging from leadership skills to returning balance and lots of areas in between. Linda received her MBA from the University of Florida and has years of experience in hands-on management positions. She develops her workshops based on solid research and, more importantly, real-life application. Linda is also certified in DDI and Achieve Global. Please welcome Linda Bruno and enjoy her webinar this afternoon.
Thanks so much, Taylor. Welcome, everybody, to today's session. And I was just listening to that introduction, which some of you probably are bored by, and I know that's part of the process of doing a webinar. We have to do that. But for those of you who don't know me, that gives you a little bit of a glimpse of who I am. But one of the things that it mentioned was the research that I do. And I do a ton of research on almost every topic. But on this particular topic, when I put it together, I was thinking about how common customer service information is. And we typically, it doesn't hurt us to get a refresher on a lot of the basics and a lot of the more delicate situations we deal with our customers. But in this particular instance, I want you to think a little differently about today's program. It's not as much about specific information that comes from research as it is about the quote that you see on the slide, which is cheerleading is more than a sport, it's an attitude. And that's what I want you to focus on for the next 80 some minutes, is thinking through what kind of an attitude are we hoping for from our patrons. And that attitude is that we would like them to be our cheerleaders, because we need that now more than ever. We've got to make sure that we are the ones that are so valuable in our communities that people cannot imagine anything happening to their libraries. But in order to do that, we have to make sure that there are cheerleaders. So I'm going to suggest that you print out your handouts, and those came to you. Taylor sent them in the same email that you clicked on to enter the room today. So your handout is there available to you. But I suggest that you either download that or print them out so that you can write on them or whatever, because this is information that you can use today and tomorrow and 5 years from now. When you just kind of get a little bit stale and you think, we're doing the same things every day, we aren't really looking at it from our patrons' perspective. We're looking at it more from what's the next thing we need to do. And you can go back and refresh yourself with just this 2 or 3 page handout as a little manual or a little guiding template, if you will, of how you can think differently about things. So as I mentioned, let's think together and brainstorm together ways we can turn our patrons into our biggest cheerleaders, because it is about their attitude. With that being said, the first question on your handouts is, what words do you think of when you think of cheerleader? And you see I've got A through Z there. That doesn't mean you have to write a letter or a word down that matches that letter. It just means that we should be able to come up with that many different attributes of a cheerleader. So go ahead and just type some in. There you go, Abby. Uplifting. You don't want a cheerleader that says, rah, rah, team, I love my library. Exactly, Chris. You want energy. You want enthusiasm. You want them to motivate other people, which is why they're your cheerleaders. You want them to be positive and passionate and supporters. Look at the words you've already put in there. And if you want to take just a second to scroll back through there and write down any of those that you really want to think about as we go through today's session. I'm pretty sure there are some in there that I didn't have written on my list. So I know that those can be helpful to you as we work through today's session. And just to give you a little bit of a spoiler alert, if you will, what we're going to do with some of these words is we're going to group them in a little bit, and we're going to say, okay, here's a group of common words that we came up with. How do we make sure we're doing things to elicit that kind of a feeling from our cheerleaders? So as you're going through that, think of it in those terms. I'm going to throw up some more words for you. That didn't sound very good, did it? I'm going to put up some more words for you on the slide. Cheerful, no matter what. Exactly, Abby. Even if things aren't going quite well, maybe a cheerleader isn't cheerful, but they're still hopeful, aren't they? They still are encouraging. They're still loyal. They're still all of those kinds of things. I will tell you that many, many years ago, I tried out for cheerleading at my high school because I was one of those go team, loyal people, exactly one to hopeful about everything. I didn't make it. I'm not very athletically inclined. But one of the things I will never ever forget from that long ago is that the head cheerleader, who happened to be one of the judges, came up to me afterwards and she said, "I know you didn't make the team," and she said you were 1 point off, and we had to give it to the person that had more points. But she said, "I want you to know if there was anybody that should make this cheerleading squad based on their enthusiasm and their loyalty to the school and their passion, it would have been you." I never forgot that, because that's how I want to feel about things that are important to me. So that's how you want your patrons to feel as well, isn't it? So here are some of the other words. I've got several slides here, so don't panic if you don't write everything down, but maybe on each slide, pick out a word or two if we haven't covered it yet that you think you might need to consider. Let's look at loyal, for example. If you've got any kind of funding issues or a lack of support from your dean or a lack of support from your city government or your board of trustees or whoever might be an entity that has some control over your funding, you would like to make them more loyal to you, wouldn't you? I remember I was meeting with somebody a few years ago, and she was telling me about a meeting she had had in a rural area of Florida many years ago with the board of no, the city council, I guess it was. And one of the fellows leaned back and he said, "Do we really need a library?" As in, leave out the R. "We've already got a 7-Eleven." And in his mind, the 7-Eleven, which stuns me, was a substitute for the library because it had magazines and a few paperback books. And so we want people in our communities to be loyal to us, don't we? We, as you all said, enthusiastic. And along with being loyal and enthusiastic, let's put those two together and say, okay, we want them to be vocal about being loyal and enthusiastic. We want them talking to other people about, you can go there to your library and they have so many more things than you would ever imagine. Exactly, Chris. You want them to be an advocate, don't you? That's exactly what those words mean. Loyal, enthusiastic, and vocal means they're going to advocate for you. Now, I will tell you, though, from a patron's perspective, and that's the perspective I would come from, the word advocate scares me a little bit. Now, it doesn't really, but you understand what I'm saying? If I'm not involved in the library world where that word is used quite frequently, then that word could be a little intimidating to me because it makes it sound like I have to go march on Tallahassee to get you some more money. And I'm sure you would all love it if I would do that. But the word advocate kind of scares people sometimes, or like I said, intimidates them. But if you just say, we need somebody to be loyal and enthusiastic about our library, can we count on you? Then you pull them into, gosh, I wouldn't ever want my library to disappear. We want them to be encouraging to us. What if we have a program and we have worked for a year planning a program that we thought people wanted because we had asked, we kind of got a sense of this was something that our community would respond to, but only 5 people showed up and we were expecting 35 people. I would hope that our cheerleaders are also encouraging to us when they say, you know what, those 5 people needed to be there. We love the idea that you put forth this program. Let's try to build on it and do it again. Because then you aren't sort of slumping away saying, well, we wasted all that time and money. So you also want them to be encouraging to you. You want your cheerleaders to be confident. I was talking to somebody, it was actually last year's New Year's Eve, not this past year, but I went across the street to the neighbor's house. They were just having a few people in for New Year's Eve. And so we're sitting there after we had our hors d'oeuvres, and I was sitting there with a glass of wine. And the husband neighbor, said, "You work with libraries, right?" And I said, "Yep, exclusively. That's all I do." Big beaming smile on my face. And he said, are they even going to be around in a few years? And I almost fell off my chair. I pushed back my chair so quick I almost knocked it over. And I said, please don't let my people hear you say that, because that's how I think of you all. You're my people. And he started grinning a little bit. I said, let me tell you about some of the things that libraries do these days. And I was just telling him about some of the fun things like the lending libraries with cake pans, or human libraries and some of those cool things, but also about the fact that you all have, some of you have had to experience getting Narcan kits in your library. And he looked at me like, what? A library? And I said, that's why the libraries are so important in their communities. So you want that confidence, don't you? You want somebody sitting there and feeling confident about, they don't have to come up with made up stories about the library, because they're confident that their library is more critical in their community than it's ever been before. So again, I don't necessarily expect you to write all down 26 words. Maybe you will, and I kind of hope you do, but you don't have to. You just need to pick out the ones that maybe are lacking with your patrons right now. Maybe you don't feel that sense of encouragement or confidence or whatever it might be from your patrons. And those are the ones I want you to write down, so that as we go through the rest of the program, you can say, okay, there's one of those words I was thinking we might need to focus on. Here are some things we can do to encourage more of that. More words. Focused. You want them kind of to be a little more alert to the fact that the library plays such an integral role in your community. In other words, you don't want them thinking about your competitors, the Amazons of the world and Amazon's overnight delivery and blah, blah, blah. You want them kind of to be focused on the fact that we are not going to let our library go by the wayside, as so many things have done with technology and the internet and things like that. You want them to be kind of spirited. I kind of look at that meeting with my neighbor, that I was a little bit spirited because I was a little bit maybe more forceful than I should have been. I didn't feel bad about it. I wasn't mean, I wasn't rude, but I was very vocal about it and spirited about the fact that you really need to go to your library. As a matter of fact, this fellow just wrote a book last year and he had it self-published, but I thought, if you want people to read books, a library is a good place to consider as part of the community. When I say the word prominent, exactly, Abby. But you know what? I'm just going to take a little aside here with Abby's comment. She said, if we're not excited, who will be? But I go into libraries where the sense of the atmosphere, the environment feels very negative, and you can sense it from all of the people on staff, and you can even sense it from the patrons, because the patrons aren't excited to be there. Like you said, Abby, why would they be if there's that feeling there? They're probably getting that already from their own workplace, and they don't want to come to the library and feel that way. So absolutely, they need to be excited. And prominent, when I say prominent, I don't mean you have to have the mayor speaking vocally for you, which I certainly hope the mayor does speak vocally for your library. But when I think of prominent, I think of people who are willing to step up to the plate. That it doesn't necessarily mean they have a really high profile job or a high profile status or a high profile family name in your community, but they are prominent in the fact that everywhere you turn when it regards the library, they're involved, because that's how they feel about their library. And you want them to admire your library, don't you? You want them to think, I just think this is the coolest thing since sliced bread. The kind of person that says, I remember my first visit to the library when I was a child. And so they admire what you do. Because let's face it, there are a lot of people that don't even know what you do, much less admire what you do. So you want them also to be an admirer. So some more words. I told you I had a lot of them. Exactly, Wanda. Their faces show it, their body language show it, their actual language shows it. I walked into a library, it's probably been, I'm going to say 3 or 4 years ago, and it was in Florida. That's where most of my work is done. I do go out of state, but I don't solicit that, so I spend a lot of time in Florida libraries. And I knocked on the staff door early in the morning, because that's always my instruction, go to the staff door. And the person opened it, and I said, hi, I'm Linda Bruno. I'm here to do the workshop today for XYZ. Where should I go? And she looked at me with this really, I'm not even going to say aggravated. It was a more of a disinterested look. And she said, I don't have a clue. And she turned around and walked away. And I thought, okay, I'm in trouble because I don't know where I'm at. I've never been here before. And I said, excuse me. I said, where should I go? She points to the doors on the other side of the room and she said, go through those double doors. I said, okay, I'll go through the double doors. So I did. And I got out into the library and there was nobody there because it was before opening hours and it was a big library. And I thought, okay, I'll wander around. So I'm dragging my briefcase and my stuff with me. And I finally found a room that looked like it might be a meeting room. And there was somebody putting out water. And I said, do you know if there's a meeting or a workshop in here today? And she said, yeah, I think so. So I walked in and just kind of made the assumption that was where I was supposed to be. So I went ahead and started to set my stuff up, and somebody finally came in after about 10 or 15 minutes, and I said, I need to get the tech set up, and they said, okay, we'll call somebody, and it was another 10 or 15 minutes, and by that time we're getting fairly close to start time. That to me is within 15 or 20 minutes. That's too close. Somebody from tech came in and said, didn't anybody tell you this hasn't been working right for 2 weeks? I was just my heart just dropped because I knew with that kind of attitude that I had already faced 2 or 3 times before my program ever started, and this was a mandatory meeting that they were having, I knew what the whole day was going to be. And it was one of the most draining days that I've ever spent. So I just want to make it clear to you that just because we know all these things are right doesn't mean that that's what really comes across to our patrons, does it? Abby said, if we did that at Kaiser, we'd be out the door so fast. And I'm just going to say, you should be. You know me, I'm a big customer service person. And Wanda said it probably was that you were bothering them. Absolutely. I'm sure I was. But, here's the thing. Even if somebody comes up to me in a workshop and I'm in the middle of thinking through something or getting things ready or whatever, and quote, I could say they're bothering me, I hope, I never come across that anybody's ever bothering me. I may be thinking in the back of my mind, oh my gosh, I've only got 3 more minutes left before the break is over and I've got to get this ready. But you know what? If that person took their time to come to me and ask for help or give me information, then everything else is on the back burner right then. So I guess what I'm saying here is we just need to make sure that we're exhibiting these things on a regular basis. And I'm also going to add, even if the people we work with are not. And I bet, I don't want to see a show of hands. I don't want you to type anything in response in the chat box, but I'd be willing to bet out of probably 15 attendees here today, and then Taylor and I would be extra to that, probably out of 15 people here today, and who knows how many people will listen to this recording. I bet all of you know somebody, maybe you don't work directly with them, that doesn't give off that kind of a vibe to patrons. And so they are affecting whether that patron is a cheerleader or not, aren't they? That's what I want you to notice. If I am a real, I'm going to use the quote, real cheerleader for a sports team, and I know that the team doesn't care and that the team could care less whether they win or lose, how do you think that's going to affect me? So if your cheerleaders or your potential cheerleaders come into your environment and they encounter even one person who acts like they don't care about the library, it will have some effect on that potential cheerleader, won't it? And so just be aware of that. Don't let somebody else draw you into that negativity. And negativity is so easy to absorb. We're like little sponges. So be very careful about that. So the other words that I have up here, promoter, you want them out in the community talking about their library, getting excited about the programs and the services. You want them supporting you when it does come down to funding. Or maybe you do have a program coming up that's relatively new and you're not quite sure, but you know Mrs. Smith is always a good supporter. Maybe you contact Mrs. Smith and say, you know what, you are so good to our library. Would you mind coming to this particular program and maybe even bringing a friend or two so that we make sure we've got a good attendance and we can get your feedback afterwards and find out what we could be doing better? Abby said, you're being so uplifting. It helps me with any challenges here. Thank you, Abby. I appreciate that. I hope I'm not saying anything that seems like pie in the sky to all of you, but I will say that some of it's challenging just because of our own environments. We all work in environments that can be challenging to be happy and uplifting and enthusiastic, can't we? Don't we? We all work in those kind of environments from time to time. Hopefully not 24/7. But, there are challenges that come into every workplace. So I don't think any of these are unreasonable. I think it's just a matter of us making sure that we are presenting a united front so that the people walking in our doors want to be our cheerleaders. We can't force them to be our cheerleaders, can we? I don't know of any schools that go out, or any professional sports teams that go out and pick people off of the street and say, you have to be a cheerleader for us. That would not be effective. We can't do that either. We have to create the kind of atmosphere where people want to be our promoter. They want to support us when there's a funding issue or we need donations of some sort. They want to be positive about us because they always have positive experiences. They want to be committed to something. So often in our communities, people are looking for something, a cause, aren't they? They're looking for something they can get behind. And the more I'm reading about technology and things like that, the more I'm finding that we are starting to let a generation slip away from us because of technology. Technology is wonderful. Libraries need to stay up to date, on the cutting edge, come up with new things with technology. However, I'm starting to read where we also need to find ways to get them back to doing hands-on things, back to doing more creative things. So keep all of that in mind so that they're committed to our libraries. We want them to be part of our team, don't we? The best sports teams with cheerleaders consider the cheerleaders as part of their teams. And that's what we want to do with our patrons. We want our patrons to feel so good when they walk into our libraries that they feel like they're home. Some of you have heard me talk about the third place, and that's what we're looking for our patrons. We want our libraries to be their third place. In other words, we all have home, we all have work. All of you here have both of those, or you wouldn't be in a webinar about libraries, and you have a place to lay your head tonight. But most of us are looking for a third place where we feel welcomed and valued and appreciated, and it kind of feeds our soul, if that doesn't sound too la-la. It makes us feel good about being there, and that's what we're trying to generate when we're trying to get our patrons to be cheerleaders. Other words, we want them to be a little bit competitive. If there's something going on in our community, and let's say we have some kind of a levy coming up to vote a half a cent sales tax to support our library for the next 5 years or whatever, but there's something else on the ballot, we want our cheerleaders out there convincing people why it needs to be the library's funding they vote for and not somebody else's funding. So we want them to have a little bit of a competitive nature. We want them to be out there saying, I know that this is going on in our community on Tuesday, but did you know the library is having this kind of a program and they've never done that before and it's going to be phenomenal. That's that competition side. Cheerleaders are a little bit competitive. They're not going to root for the other team while their team is playing. They're going to be competitive with the other teams, not only the other team's players, but they're also going to be competitive with those cheerleaders and try to outscream them, right? You've all been to games where the cheerleaders try to get you to yell louder. Don't you want your patrons doing that? So they become your squad, your posse, if you will, your people, your tribe, whatever you want to call it. There are all kind of slang words out there to describe the people who support us. So you want them to be there for you. You also want it to be kind of a tradition where maybe somebody comes to the library when they're 2 or 3 years old with mom, because mom came to the library when she was 2 or 3 years old with her grandma or whatever it is, and it has become a tradition in that family that those people will want to be in your library. I know that I went to a very small high school, and many of the cheerleaders who just got on the squad had the same last name as somebody who'd been a cheerleader there 15 years before. And if you don't get on the squad, you get a little irritated about that because you feel like they got on there because of their name. But truly, it had more to do with that attitude we talked about earlier, didn't it? It had more to do with that person grew up wanting to be a cheerleader for that particular team because they had seen that in their family. So it was more of a tradition. They worked hard to get there. They didn't get it just because of their name. They're boosters, aren't they? Some schools have booster clubs. You have a booster club at your library. What's it called? Most of you have booster clubs. What do you call them? I see a couple of you. Yep, friends of the library, patrons. Absolutely, Abby. Many of you have friends of the library. And even though sometimes I hear that there's a little bit of maybe tension or friction sometimes between the friends and the people running the library because the friends have a pot of money and the people have a different idea of where it should be spent, those kinds of things, but still they're your boosters, aren't they? And so you want the other patrons to be a similar kind of booster. Maybe they can't join Friends of the Library, but you want them to have that same attitude. And you want them to be a friend. Even if they're not officially in the group that calls themselves Friends of the Library, you want them to be a friend to the library. Friends stick up for each other, don't they? Friends encourage each other when there are rough times. Friends help each other when they're overwhelmed. Think about the different aspects of each one of these words that we're talking about. You want them to be expressive. You want them to show and vocalize how excited they are about your library. Several of you mentioned earlier enthusiastic and uplifting and positive and excited and all of those kinds of things. That's being expressive, isn't it? You can't really tell if somebody's excited unless they're expressive about it. A good cheerleading squad is dynamic. They're always thinking ahead. They're always trying to find ways to encourage their team. And that's what you're looking for from your patrons. So I hope you've come up with a few words out of all those many words. I think I probably had maybe over 20 on my list, but you all added other words. So we probably ended up with closer to 30 rather than the 26. So I hope you'll zero in on a couple of those words that will then encourage you as we move through the rest of today's session. So number 2 says, which of these words are missing in your patron library dynamics, or which words would you just list a couple of them that you would like to really kind of focus on to say, you know what, I want to make sure our patrons are like whatever those words are. And then would you type them in the chat box as well? This is at the bottom of page 1 of your handouts, but if you'd also type them in the chat box, and that gives everybody a chance too to refresh some of those words that we saw on previous slides. I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. Maybe go back in your notes and look at it and see if there's anything there. There should be at least 1 or 2 words that you say, you know what, we're really not in tune with that as much as we could be. And then write it down and write it into the chat box. I love those words popping in. Energetic, cheerful, energetic, passionate, dynamic, motivate, motivator, energetic, having faculty be enthusiastic and supportive of how we can complement their teaching. You know, Abby, I'm just going to throw this out to you. I had somebody in a class a few years ago. We weren't even talking about this per se. We were talking about some kind of customer service. And she said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back and one of the things I'm going to do to encourage the faculty to be enthusiastic is to tell them how many resources we have for their particular students. And it was something like, 117,000 or whatever it might have been, because of course, being in an academic library, that's what everything was focused on. And she was almost certain, and I never found out for sure, but she was almost certain that that would make a difference in whether or not the faculty became cheerleaders. It's amazing to me how many of them, as long as they aren't using Wiki, their students aren't using Wiki, don't really care where information comes from. And so they're part of the problem when that happens, aren't they? And then we also have words like cheerful and passionate, uplifting popping up, energetic, enthusiastic, passionate, focused. Do you see all those words? If we can just say when we leave here today, two more words popped up, energetic and supportive, that's what I'm going to look at for the next, let's just say 60 to 90 days until it becomes somewhat of a habit. I was just reading something in a book today and they didn't italicize it or bold it or anything, but it was only 4 words that really made an impact on me. And I thought to myself, I'm going to use this in most of my programs. And what it said was, information is not transformation. Did you hear that? We're giving each other information today, aren't we? But it's not transformation. You're going to have to take the information that we talk about today and use it to transform some of your patrons. Now, hear me clearly. You're not going to transform everybody, are you? That would be weird. There are just some people that come to the library to use the library and they're happy doing that. But you do have a pocket of people that can be your cheerleaders. But information is not transformation. So be aware of that. I love that. It was very profound for me because I try to learn something new all the time. And then I think, well, I've got that information about emotional intelligence or personalities or whatever it is, but I have to transform how I'm behaving before that information really becomes transformational. So keep that in mind as you're thinking through these things today. Then what are you going to do? And we're going to talk about that. The reason we need to turn our patrons into cheerleaders is because we have competition. 15 years ago, there was a little bit out there, but really nobody thought much about competition for libraries. So who are your competitors? I see bookstores, 7-Eleven apparently, exactly. Hopefully not anymore, but you know what? In rural areas, who knows where those people go for things? Bookstores, 7-Eleven, the internet again, technology, online resources, Amazon, and I just heard on Clark Howard this morning that Amazon has announced 1-day delivery for Prime members for I don't know how many thousands of their millions of their products. And so that becomes even more of an issue. Let's say I live 7 miles from the library, but I can click on Amazon tonight and I can get what I need tomorrow. And if I've got disposable income, that might be what I do. So that's going to be around forever, isn't it? Barnes and Noble even. Our local Barnes and Noble has the coffee shop and all that kind of stuff and a humongous magazine rack, and a lot of people hang around there just for the environment. Just saying. Chris said anything that can sap funds away is competition, right? Especially for libraries that share funding with other city and county departments and organizations. That's why you've got to make sure your patrons, your slash cheerleaders are competitive in getting the word out about why the library is more important than those other competitors that are out there. I think you all mentioned most of these. Even social media and the games, we just say the internet in general, and we kind of think that's, kind of dismiss that. That's just the internet. But think about what that actually entails and how much attention that can take away from your library with social media and games. So absolutely the internet, bricks and mortar stores, other libraries. I have had many people over the years come up to me at face-to-face workshops and say to me, don't tell anybody, but I don't go to my local library because they're not very nice. I go to a library a few more miles away. They do use a library. They just for their relaxation, for their downtime, for their leisure, they don't use their own libraries. So that's part of our competition too. So if you just look at this slide for a second, you can see how important it is that we find ways to take pockets of our patrons and turn them into serious cheerleaders. So We have to keep in mind that the reason we want to do that is because there is competition out there. And why is knowing about that important? Because they can get funding, like Chris said. They get people, they get bodies. Hey, I bet everybody in the room today, I know hay is for horses, but I bet everybody in the room today knows that your library has something to do with statistics, that they have to keep statistics of some sort. So that's another reason we need those bodies in our library, and we don't just need them there once, we need them coming back time and time again because we need the statistics on our side. You all know me well enough to know that I'm very adamant about not getting focused on statistics, but I'm also very realistic that statistics are a permanent part of our library staying in business. They need to be, don't they? Barnes & Noble isn't going to stay in business if they don't sell X number of books or sell X number of cups of coffee or whatever it is they sell. They have to be aware of their statistics, but they then connect those statistics with what can we do in our environment to make people want to come here instead of going to their library. That's what they're doing, aren't they? I'm pretty sure. I've never talked to anybody at higher up Barnes & Noble or Amazon, but I'm pretty sure one of the things they talk about is who are our competitors. And libraries probably come up in that conversation. So why don't we include that in our conversations? We need to make sure we know why our competitors are trying to get our people away. And then the question becomes, what can we offer that they can't or don't or won't? Abby said there are librarians who work at Barnes & Noble. I would think that would be a perfect place for people to get a side hustle, if that's what you want to call it, for an extra job. And Chris said the ALA statistic about how the U.S. has more libraries than Starbucks is flashy, and it isn't all that granular, but it's a perfect bite of info for the public to digest. Absolutely. Because they don't know that. One of my closest library is so kind of in a weird position. There are several subdivisions that are within a mile or two of them, but the actual location is down a main road, down a little bit of a side road, then down a really main actual side road, and you end up almost out in the country to go to this library, even though demographic wise, when you look at a map, they are kind of in the center of a bunch of people, but it's just not noticeable. So that's exactly right, Chris. The library isn't, the Starbucks I go by two Starbucks just to get into town in Ocala. So that's what we have to think of. Abby said, I rarely go to a public library except when my daughter was small and I brought her to story hour. And now, Abby, you hear enough from webinars and workshops and things that you know what's in a public library and you know how phenomenal they've become. But think about the people who don't even work in an academic library and really don't even make the connection that a library is that important. So we have to stay focused on what can we offer that the competitor does not, they can't, they don't, they won't, so that those patrons remain cheerleaders for us. So now we're going to do what I mentioned earlier. We're going to group those words. We're not going to take each individual word because we'd have to stay here until next Wednesday. And I won't do that to you. You know I always try to end on time. So we're going to group some of these words, similar words, to see what types of programming or offering or services or connections or events or activities or interactions. Do you see all the things that we can now pull from? That information right there toward the top of page 4, if you look at all of those different areas, the programming, the offerings, the connections, the community events, the activities, the interactions, all of those are potential slots for us to figure out how we can make patrons into cheerleaders. So we're going to group them. And I've already grouped the words for you. Now we're going to do that brainstorming I mentioned earlier, which is a little different than a lot of webinars I do. But I want you to think through what kinds of there are no right or wrong answers here. Every answer we gather today is that much more ammunition we have to fight off competitors. So think of it that way. No right or wrong answers. Come up with as many ideas as you can for the people in this room, because that's what this is about. The more we share, the richer the content becomes today. So let's look at the first group. Loyal, champion, committed, tradition. What kinds of things are you doing at your library or have you heard of that you think would create that kind of feeling from a patron to make them a cheerleader? Anything. I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. What kind of programs, Lena? We got to get real specific here because we know our libraries have programs. We know they have activities. We know they make connections. I want some specific ideas. Okay, Daniela, give me a unique children's program that you do because pretty much every library does children's programs. How are we going to get those patrons to be cheerleaders? You know, Abby mentioned story hour. Pretty much every library does some semblance of a story hour. What are we doing that sets us apart that's different than what we were doing 5 or 10 years ago that will make people say, oh my gosh, I had no idea the library does that for kids, and I'm going to take my kids there? Hard of hearing programs. Here's something I'll throw out to you. A couple years ago, I was doing a program for a very large library system, and we actually broke the program down into 4 half days so that everybody could attend and still staff all of their library branches. And one of the things we talked about was give me a story in your library that you think the public would have no clue you would do something like that, that's above and beyond. And one of the stories that came up, this reminded me, Nelson, one of the stories that came up was this particular library had a hard of hearing child in their group. No, I take that back. He wasn't hard of hearing. He was visually impaired. And he would come in every time with his mom and he would run to the counter. He knew where the counter was and he would feel around and he would pick up a bookmark. He didn't really know what the bookmark said, but it was his. It was for free. It always excited him. So they found a Braille label maker. And the next time that he came in, they had a bookmark behind the counter and they stuck it in that little tray and they had used Braille to type his name and say hi or something. It wasn't a lot of words. He picked up the bookmark and he immediately felt that there was something on there and his eyes lit up and his mom cried because they had paid that much attention. Do you think she's going to be a cheerleader for her library? Pretty sure. That's what I want you to start thinking about. What are those little bits and pieces that make people think, I'm not going to Barnes & Noble, I'm going to my library? Danielle said family story time that invites the whole family to come in. Exactly, because that's something that's kind of going by the wayside nowadays, isn't it? Family activities of any kind. Melody said wages and tails. Okay, I don't know what that is. It might be wags and tails. I'm not sure. If you can give us a little bit of information about those so that somebody else in the room might go, oh, that's something we haven't done before. Abby said orientation to better know the databases and also an APA template, because if you're asking for those kinds of citations, people can get really confused. I remember when I was in school, it was just a few years ago, my husband's college that he taught for used a different citation format than mine did, and I found myself getting really confused about exactly what I was supposed to do. My life was a little difficult during that time. Then they can spend their time doing research exactly like Abby instead of fretting over APA style. It always frustrated me that somebody got more focused on the citation style than on the actual research and my conclusions and my problem solving and all those kinds of things. So that's an excellent thing to do for them. Book a librarian, showing you how to use your iPad and your iPhone. People don't know that, do they, Wanda? A lot of people don't know that. And maybe a lot of libraries don't use that. And yes, some of these things require a little bit of time. Maybe some of them require a little bit of funding. I'm not saying you have to start this afternoon. I'm just saying consider some of these things to turn your patrons into cheerleaders. Lena said toddler story time and baby story time. We've heard. Here's one for you, Lena. How about doing an expectant mother story time? Because there is research showing that when babies hear voices and the animated voices and so forth, it makes a difference in how their brains develop. Family story time, meditation classes, local author book signing, American Sign Language, all of the above. I see a lot of things have popped in here. I'm going to read them because I think they're that important. American Sign Language, and I don't think the chat actually loads for people listening to the recording. So if you'll be patient with me to go through these, plus you may have missed one in the chat that you hear me talk about. Pet therapy sponsorship. Corsina, can you give me a little bit more details about that? I've heard of pet therapy. I've heard of the dogs. You read to the dog, a child that might be struggling a little bit with reading, does the reading therapy dog. What is pet therapy sponsorship? Chris said Gainesville celebrating its 150th year of incorporation. We're trying to link up with city programs and events to encourage that feeling of community support and loyalty, including mentioning to our patrons that we have a heritage collection of digitized image from years past, which I just posted on our Facebook. It hits tradition and loyal. Absolutely, it does, Chris. And it shows patrons we have yet another thing that is more than books. And you might even check with the Florida Archives at the State Library, Chris, and see if they have anything they could add to that. Maybe you've already done that. But I know when I toured that the first year I actually worked as a facilitator in the Leadership Institute, that was one of the things that fascinated me was the really cool stuff they've got at the Florida Library Archives. Storytelling to dogs, great. There you go. Nelson said learning to read lips, sign language, communication with the deaf, activities. Wags and Tails are children reading stories to dogs. Absolutely. Annual Storybook Festival. Lots of festival potential, isn't there? And it can start slow and grow. Oh, I like that. We should make that our motto. Start slow and grow, right? And then as you're growing that, you find people to help sponsor that. You find people to help you build it. You find your cheerleaders that help you promote it. Abby said, my goal is that the students have fun doing research. That's great, Abby, because you know what? If I don't have to worry about the comma being in the wrong place on my APA citation, I am going to enjoy that research more. Lena said, pause to read program and different crafts throughout the month to encourage patrons to continue to come to the library. Something to look forward to. We need that in our world today. Abby said some webinars have been doing sign language recently. You know, a lot of times Swiftland has had Deb available to actually do sign language and sign this webinar. So they're kind of unique in that perspective, Swiftland is. And I know sometimes scheduling doesn't always allow that, but absolutely. Christina said just providing a time slot for students to come and see the therapy dogs between classes. I want to go to your school, Corsina. I love animals. And I'm telling you, I was at an age when I got my second degree, my first one as well, because I got my second one immediately after the first one. It was only 6 years ago, folks. And those of you who know me know that I'm not 20. I'm not even 30. And so my stress level was really high. I can only tell you that I would have been so much more excited about going to the library if I knew that between classes I could go see a dog at the library, because it would take that stress away, wouldn't it? So think about that. I love your ideas. I hope others in the room have been able to pick up on some of those ideas. Let's look at the next group. Here are just a few that I have put down. You could have animal adoption programs at your library. I forgot that I have even written this down in my own creative brainstorming. You're looking for the personal, some kind of a personal touch, aren't you? When you can call people by name if you know them by name, not in a stalker-like way, but in a way that makes them feel valued and appreciated. Sometimes, to get them to be loyal and committed to you and a champion for you, we might have to step back and look at our rules and policies sometimes, right? Because they've been there for 47 years doesn't mean they're still valid. So sometimes just stepping back and looking at that can help. Sometimes it's asking them what they want to make them loyal. You know, when people ask me what I want, I might be a little more likely to go back to that, quote, place of business than I would to go somewhere else, because they actually showed that they valued me. Now, here's something I want to say, though. When somebody pesters me every day for a week trying to get me to give them feedback, that just irritates me. So we have to be careful about how we're trying to make people loyal, don't we? Genealogy classes are part of that tradition kind of a thing. Partner with social services to get them to be loyal and committed. How to check their credit. Those are the kinds of things that might create that loyal, champion, committed tradition kind of a feeling from your patrons. Here's the next group of words. The group of words is enthusiastic, vocal, expressive, dynamic. One said, for change, are you kidding me? That's all you hear is, this is how we always have done it. Yes, I know, Wanda. I know, but it never hurts to bring up the conversation. You might just hit somebody at the right time who says, you know what? The next question would be, why are we still doing it? What makes it still valid today to open that conversation, right? Okay, so for those of you thinking through this, how can you get your patrons into cheerleaders that are enthusiastic, vocal, expressive, or dynamic? What are some things that create enthusiasm? And again, some of the things that I've written down could probably go in every category. But this is just a way to get you thinking in a different frame of mind as you're going through these. Giveaways, absolutely. Figure out ways you can do that. New programs, change, new technologies at the library, a welcoming smile, exactly. Because when you welcome them, they're enthusiastic, aren't they? Some are at the library and bags of stuff, free books. They don't get free books at Barnes and Noble or Starbucks or from the internet. Now I know they can in certain ways, but if they want a book that they can hold, a lot of times it's going to be at the library, isn't it? I want to give that just a second to see if anybody else pops up before I start adding mine. Okay, I have greetings, just like you just said, a welcoming smile. If you know their name, greet them by name. Exactly. Friendliness. That's how you create that enthusiasm. Screensavers with library information. So that's that dynamic piece, constantly changing. They don't even know you have therapy dogs. They don't even know you have reading story times for dogs. Put something on the screensaver. Be careful about your screensavers. Don't fill it with a lot of library jargon that's not really going to sink in. If you've got a reading to the dogs program, put a picture of the dog on there, right? Not, we have a reading program with canines. That's not really going to sink in. So screensavers would be dynamic. Snacks, yoga during finals for the academic libraries, the therapy dogs during finals, all of the above. Snacks that could be sponsored possibly by somebody. Bright slides, absolutely. When you're doing these kinds of things, like slides and your screensaver, as I mentioned, make sure that it's patron friendly, not library staff friendly, if you know what I mean. We use a lot of words in the library world that we absolutely know make sense and they're right on target, but they don't necessarily resonate with our patrons and make them cheerleaders. For instance, the word literacy. It's used 1,000 times a day in most libraries. I'm exaggerating. It's a perfect word to describe what we're doing. However, it can be a little off-putting to patrons. I think I've shared with some of you before that I had a lady tell me once when we were talking about this, because we were talking about people that didn't have jobs, and she said, I said, don't call it financial literacy if you're going to help them with budgeting, because that really makes them feel bad. And she said, I could tell them how to cut 30% from their budget overnight because I had to when my husband lost his job. I said, then do a workshop on how to cut your budget by 30% overnight. Really? I would attend that. I'm probably not going to attend one called financial literacy. So make sure you're using words that resonate with people. Again, the surveys are back in this category as well. If you want them to be enthusiastic, ask them what they love or what they think is missing, what they would like to see that's not being done yet. More enthusiastic, vocal, expressive dynamics. Lunch and learns on what you offer. A lunch and learn for academics, for the students of what you offer. Buttons for the staff. How can I help? Handouts for job seekers. Maybe you put the handouts at the workforce board location. I can't remember what their current name is. It's changed 3 or 4 times just since I've lived here. Postcards from patrons, or a thank you, or how did we help? Alachua County. Who's here from Alachua County? Chris, is that you? I can't remember. I'm sorry. Okay. Several years ago, I was doing a program there, and they were telling me about a postcard that they have that they used an artist rendering of every branch library in the county. The Friends of the Library paid for the postcard. They had these artist rendering reduced down to postcard size for each library of just their library building. And then on the back, they had something printed along the lines of this coming from the patron to be mailed to maybe a county commissioner or somebody. And it was something along the lines of, I love my library. Today and then it had a few categories, checked out a book, filled out a job application, checked for resources for whatever, and a place for comments. Then those were actually turned back into the library, so nobody had to pay postage. The Friends of the Library supported the postage, so nobody could say you're using our library money on postcards. Then the directors would go through those and see which ones would be appropriate to forward on to city administrators or whoever the entity was. And I apologize because I can't remember back that far. I just remembered that postcard because it was wonderful. And it was evergreen. And that means that you could use it forever because it's still appropriate. And then if you have to reprint, is there anything you'd like to add to the back of it where it says today maybe it's some kind of a makerspace, or maybe it's some kind of a green room that I recorded a video, or whatever it might be. Those are the kinds of things. Oh, I didn't know you weren't using it anymore, Chris. I might suggest bringing that back. That's a great idea. Know the watercolor images you're talking about. There you go. I have one of those somewhere in one of my notebooks that I take to workshops because I like to show it to people to use. There it is. There it is. Does that look familiar, Chris? And then on the back of the actual postcard, here, I don't know if this is the exact wording they had, but wouldn't that be, yes, it is beautiful, Abby. Wouldn't that be attention getting? Wouldn't your patrons feel like cheerleaders if you had something like this? And if you can get somebody else to sponsor it, your friends to sponsor that, and then pick out the 3 or 4 really key things that your library is doing. Don't print 10,000 of them. Print enough to last for a year. Look at it again and say, what are we doing now that's so unique we need to put it on the back of this postcard? And that I would suggest some kind of a tagline about our library is essential. Our library, ALA had that campaign for a while. Our library transforms lives. Our library changes lives. Our library whatever. And then the little disclaimer at the bottom, printing postage labels provided by private donations. Absolutely, Lena. I love it too. I think it's just one of those things that pretty much every library could use effectively. So I'm glad I inserted that because I had forgotten that I actually put it in the slides. More groups of words. Here we have the admirer, promoter, supporter, booster, friend, part of the team, squad person. And I'm going to pop up a few and then you be thinking about anything else that might tie into this particular category. Space for small business or job seekers. Dedicated space where you have one computer, maybe one small rack of books that would be helpful to them. A blog on your website for small businesses. How do they deal with taxes? How do they deal with credit cards? How do they, whatever. If you can find somebody to help with that. Promote your own resources and offerings. Brainstorm with your staff to help create new services, new activities, new connections. Remember, that's one of the things we're looking at here. More for that group. Coffee at the library. If you're going to do a literacy workshop, how about coffee at the library to talk about budgets or something like that, where people feel I'm always more relaxed. You give me a cup of coffee, I'm good to go. I can remember when I first started doing training with Dun & Bradstreet, that's who hired me when I first started doing this. And I remember going into another trainer's workshop to preview it. That's what we called it. I would go sit in on the workshop to see if it was something of interest to me to present for them. And I went into this workshop and the lady was very, just didn't seem to really care. She didn't really seem to care about what she was doing for a living, which was the same thing I was doing. So I sat in the back of the room and she said, we'll be at the bottom of page 9 by 10:15. And I thought, that doesn't really give people much flexibility here. So I didn't say anything, of course. It's not for me to say. But she wouldn't allow the hotel, it was in a hotel, she wouldn't allow the hotel to bring the coffee inside the room. It had to stay outside so that they could only get it during breaks. And I thought, oh boy, I'm not doing that because if I don't have my coffee, I don't want to be with you. So think about that. Nelson said coffee at the library and perhaps donuts as well. Absolutely. And here's a money saving way to do that. Use donut holes. if you have to. If you're on a limited budget, that makes people just as happy as a whole donut. Or if you can only get whole donuts, cut them in half. Matter of fact, I was at Swiftland's library staff day last week, and I went out to indulge, shall we say, into a cheese Danish, and they were huge. And I said, "Do you have a knife that we can cut these at least in half?" And he said, "I'll take care of that for you." They took it back to the kitchen and cut them in fourths, and they went like wildfire. Nobody wanted to feel guilty about taking a whole one, and even a half one was really big. Everybody was happy with a fourth. And if you want another one, you go back and get another one. You still only eat half of it. So keep those things in mind. Encourage your patrons to help. We love to help you. Would you like to help us help others? Is there somebody that's really good in that budgeting thing that could help you present that workshop? Is there somebody that would write a blog for you about the small businesses? Those kinds of things. Create resource checklists. Resources for health resources in your community, resources for help with paying bills, resources for a number of things where it's just available to people and they don't have to feel embarrassed about asking for it. Sometimes enlisting retired business people. There's that organization called SCORE, and it used to be the Senior Corps of Retired Executives, I think it was. The name itself has changed, but they've kept that moniker, if you will. So there are retired business people that are probably looking for ways to still feel productive. More for you. Just pick out the ones that might work for you or that resonate with you. Information on food banks, other kinds of help, how to apply for benefits. Look for partners that can help you in these things, because your partners can be your cheerleaders as well, can't they? If you partner with your workforce board, chances are they'll be sending people to your library for things. Check for user-friendly technology. Make sure the things you're offering are user-friendly for people. More under that category, and we are toward the bottom of page 2 right now. Highlight savings from the library. How do you save people money? Putting the little blurb on your website that says your library saves you $112 a month for your cable bill and this and that. That's great and it's interesting. But what savings are the people in your community actually getting from your library? Institute a suggestion box. Doesn't mean you're going to use everything, and you could even put that on a little note. We love to hear from you. We can't always use all the suggestions, but we do always review them to see how they can help other people. Put a $ link on your web page for financial resources, so that when they click on that, there's any number of things that pop up for them. And then they feel like you're friends because you're going to help them through maybe a difficult season in their life. You're part of their team now. And I'm going to mention this again, no library lingo or jargon, or be very careful of it. Programs for early release days, where the kids are getting out of school early. What can you offer them to make sure they've got something to do at the library? Have a financially savvy teen conduct a workshop for other teens. I think Dave Ramsey has kits for younger people now. They even have jars that they sell or something on their website. I hear them talk about it. This is what I listen to when I do my exercise in the morning, where they teach kids how to save, how to give, how to spend, all that kind of, the jar is actually divided, just things like that. You may have somebody that would be willing to sponsor that. Would a bank sponsor buying a few of those for you? Do you think that would make families your supporters and your admirers and your friends? Maybe. So the next group, encouraging, confident, focused, spirited, positive. Blog tips on saving money. Maybe a tip of the week. Maybe staff contributes to that. Maybe somebody in a social services agency that works with people that struggle with money help contribute to that. Just a tip of the week. It could be very brief. That's why I listen to Clark Howard and Dave Ramsey every day when I exercise. 90% of what they say doesn't even apply to me. 10% does, and then that saves me money or gets me focused on something that might save me money. A checklist for saving money. Workshops on managing money. That encourages people, doesn't it? Gives them more confidence. They become more positive because they're finding ways that work. Again, be aware of your workshop titles. You could have one called Show Me the Money instead of Cutting My Budget 30%. But you definitely, probably, maybe want to avoid financial literacy. A community idea board. How do you save money? And you don't have to have this up year round. It could just be a 1 month focus where you're having some workshops, the blog, and the idea board all tied in together. A coupon box for sharing. One library told me they put out a coupon box and they have a lady come in every week and take out the old ones. It's just something she enjoys doing. She brings her coupons in to donate and she goes through and makes sure all the expired ones are taken out. A recipe workshop. Money saving idea swap night. You just open up the program. Everybody brings at least 2 money-saving ideas, and you swap that. You seed that, if you will, with people from your staff. Make sure enough staff members will attend that they can help other people have money-saving ideas before they leave that night. Common ones, not ones that are really difficult to use, like maybe not how to make your own laundry detergent, but maybe so. Depends on what your community needs. More ideas. Maybe a support our local businesses directory where you put it online and you update it continuously. Local businesses. Of course, anybody in your town is a local business. However, there are some people that they're not part of a chain. They're an independent business. They are burdened by extra taxes and extra fees and all those kinds of things. And so they might need extra support. A training or handouts on databases like Abby was talking about earlier. Teach people how to use them. That's how you get statistics up on those kinds of things because people don't even know they're there. And if they do know they're there, they're not sure what they're for. Start a maybe a made in Florida listing. I said something one day about buying a lamp that was made in USA and somebody really got upset with me because it wasn't made in Florida. And I said, I didn't know anybody made lamps in Florida. So start a made in listing. If you're in an area where you have a lot of artists and a lot of people that are crafty and so forth, it might just be your general area. Hold a buy local fair. So you started the local businesses directory, you're doing a made in listing. Now you offer to have those people come to the library on a specific date. You add other activities to get everybody involved and so forth, but people come to the library that day because they know those people that are going to be there are local. You might have a business card display where people are allowed to put up their business cards. A how to sell online workshop. This is getting more convoluted for people because there's so many scams out there. So if you've got somebody that's really up to date on this can be really helpful for people. Coupons from local businesses. Kind of a win-win, isn't it? Maybe you could put something in the local business, a little card with your hours or something, and they give you coupons so that people come to their business. A Facebook security class. This is another huge thing. So many breaches, so many stealing of information. I'm going to also tell you maybe an Amazon Echo security class because I was hearing the other day, and you've probably seen it, that Amazon's Echo records you when it's not actually being used. And so that might be something that you want to tell people how to know what they're recording and those kinds of things. Lots of stuff in that area that people are they're so overwhelmed by it, they don't even try because they don't know where to start. So not that you're going to dig deeply into their personal stuff, but certainly give them some resources on where to start. Give them some ideas on free online learning. GCF Learn Free is the Goodwill. I think it's Goodwill Community Foundation is what that stands for. But they have Excel and Word and things like that where if people are looking for new jobs and they maybe feel insecure about their computer skills, they can go there. Coursera, Tutor.com, some of the MOOC courses, the massive open online courses at major universities where they offer it for free. You take it at your own pace. There might be 500 people in your class, but everything's set up so that it's individualized. So those kinds of things people might be interested in. You already know about this one. Kids reading to therapy dogs. I had somebody tell me, and it wasn't this program, it was something else, I think, but their kids read to goats. Baby goats in the spring. They have a local farmer who brings baby goats every spring, and they are the cutest kids. Get it? Both sides, the humans and the goats are probably really cute kids. Chris said goat yoga was a big hit at one of our branches. Exactly. I've heard of that before. I think that would be really fun. And goat story time. There you go. Chris, you may be the one that told me about that for something else. Basically just goats, right? Prominent and competitive is the next category. And we're on page 3, at the top of page 3, prominent and competitive. Collaborate with other organizations that are well known in your community. That's how your cheerleaders become prominent, right? And competitive from the standpoint of we're going to get together with our library and make sure our library shines. The United Way, the Salvation Army, your workforce board, social service agencies, all those kinds of things. Sponsor a Save Ocala program, and that would be based on frugal living. Say it sort of like the Lose Weight Ocala or whatever that thing was going around 3 or 4 years ago, where the entire towns would get involved with losing weight. It would be the same kind of a program, a similar premise, if you will. Posters and signs. Your signage needs to be dynamic too, doesn't it? It needs to be prominent. And I went into a library, it's probably been 2 or 3 years ago now, and every sign was, don't touch this, don't do this. It was that kind of a feeling. So I know we have to have some of that, but be careful about your posters and signs because you want people to feel good about coming to the library. Novel ways to communicate what you're doing, whatever that is. Lena said different outreach within the community to promote library services. Exactly. And Constantina said we collaborate with other county departments and display pop-up library displays at places like DMV, animal services, tax services, etc. Exactly. So that people are thinking of the library in physical locations where they would not normally think of the library. That's what makes you prominent and competitive. Because let's say the tax service office is right across from the Barnes & Noble store. But because you've got a pop-up display there, they're going to go to the library instead of Barnes & Noble, perhaps. We don't know, but certainly it's worth trying some of these things, isn't it, to turn our patrons into cheerleaders. I want to go back to novel ways to communicate what you're doing. Think about putting taglines on your email that change month to month. Maybe if you're having a Save Ocala month where you're talking about frugal living, everybody's email has that tagline. Maybe if you have a phone tree that when people call in, they get a recording. Somebody makes that recording about, did you know this month is frugal living at the Ocala library or whatever it might be. I'm just using that as an example. But that might be other ways to communicate what you're doing. More. Develop relationships with your media. It's called branding. You want them to come to you. If they've got a slot to fill, they come to you because you've got new things going on all the time that they are willing to share with the community. So whether it's a newspaper, one of those coffee mats, those little coffee placemats that are in different restaurants, it might be a TV station, it might be a radio station, whatever the media is in your area, try to develop a relationship with somebody there where they tie in with your library. A friend's savings card with advertising from local businesses. Save here if you join Friends of the Library, and local businesses pay to be on that card. They join the library or join Friends of the Library and they get a discount from them. Survey the businesses. Remember, we talked about surveying and talking to our patrons, but also survey businesses on how the library can help them. Then you become more prominent, don't you? Because now the businesses are paying attention to you as well. Chamber mixers, attend those, or library after hours. And the reason I have it phrased that way is there's typically with a Chamber of Commerce and some other kinds of groupings like that, they call it business after hours, where they have after hours meetings and people network and get to know each other. Have a library after hours. Invite the businesses to come and get to know each other at the library. Have things set up for those businesses at the library during that meeting where it becomes evident that they need to get more involved with their library. So one of the things that we've talked about that might draw them in. How to build a website workshop. For small businesses, this can be overwhelming. I'm a small business and I paid a webmaster to redo my website the first part of this year. It took 4 months. It cost a lot of money. Had I had the time or the knowledge, I would have attempted it myself. But certainly there are people selling maybe on Etsy or just kind of doing something out of their house that they would like to have a small, uh, just kind of a simple website for. And maybe you know somebody that can help people build a website. That might be a workshop you would have to make them more prominent. And many of you have tax workshops at the library already. Host small business petting zoos that not only is it just for technology, but it's also that those business people then get to know each other while they're at that technology petting zoo. We think anybody in business knows everything there is to know about technology, but I've got to tell you, there are a lot of large companies that don't know everything there is to know about technology. So anything you can do with technology is probably going to be helpful for a small business. The little square credit card reader, the tablets you can use for credit card signatures, things like that that they might not be aware of. And some of these things you may not have enough knowledge or confidence in yourself, but if you're connecting with those small businesses in your community, there may be somebody in your community that knows enough about it that would be willing to come and at least get people started. You're not going to get into the, like I said, the depths of what they're doing with credit cards or which merchant services company they're going to use or anything like that. You're just going to help them get an idea. Matter of fact, how about a small business workshop on what's required in the state of Florida? That kind of thing can be overwhelming for people. How about sponsoring the Chamber Book Club? Find the best business books, if you will, that are out there today, and they're not necessarily the newest ones, but the best ones that are out there, and offer to have meetings at your library for chamber members that read this book and discuss this book. Somebody will need to be in charge of it. Somebody at the chamber would need to maybe come up with discussion questions or something like that. But I could think of a dozen books that would be helpful for small businesses for their goals, their habits, hiring employees, things like that, getting to know their employees, all those kinds of things. A workshop on internet scams. And let's put slash phone scams because there are more and more of those. The IRS calls, no, they don't. Your bank calls, no, they don't. Last week I got 2 phone calls that said I was calling. It actually said Linda Bruno and had my real phone number listed as the caller ID. It's getting more and more sophisticated. The more you can educate your people, the more competitive you will be in that respect, the more loyal they will be to you, the more they will promote your services. Maybe you even have somebody from law enforcement come as a piece of that kind of a workshop. Those kinds of things can all be helpful. More. You didn't know there were this many things, did you? You might want to consider if you still have a password, and I know there are some pros and cons to this, but you might want to remove the need for a Wi-Fi password because they don't go to Starbucks and have to use a password. They don't go to McDonald's. I know that's a whole different issue because they're not with the government, but I will tell you there are libraries that have done this so that people can use their services 24/7. So that's something that would have to obviously be addressed with administration, maybe even the legal services department, the HR department, or something like that, but it's a possibility. Provide wallet cards, like little business cards. It's got your library on the front, your hours on the front, and on the back it has a space for their password if they need it when they come in, their maybe library identification number if they don't have to actually show their library card, or it could be their library card that has room for a password or whatever. So just all things. A board for help wanted. I just was reading this morning about the unemployment in our country and how it's becoming more and more difficult for employers to find qualified people because unemployment is fairly low. So maybe a help wanted board for local businesses because then again, prominent, competitive, all those kinds of things. So, okay, Bottom of page 3, let's look at some basics. What questions are most often asked at your library? Another way to kind of tie into how can we make sure our patrons are our cheerleaders? What questions are they asking? How can you handle that? What information is most requested? Could you have a template? This is all on page 3 of your handouts. What activities are most well received? Can you expand them? Can you tweak them? Can you do them more often? Can you branch off from there? At the bottom of page 3, it just says list 3 things in your library that many of your patrons may not know about. This is just to get your attention. What might they not know about? You know about all of them. Your staff knows about all of them. Some of your most loyal patrons know about them, but what might your other patrons not be aware of? Just go ahead and jot yourself a note there to list at least 3 so that you can tie those back into some of those other attributes we were talking about. Take a minute to do that. Lena said, MDPLS have free Wi-Fi services for the public with no password. There you go. Needed throughout all 50 branches. Patrons love this. It's a way to build relationships and keep patrons coming back. Absolutely. They do not have to go to Starbucks. Love that. After you've written 3 things toward the bottom of page 3, under number 5, it says, how can you get the word out about one of these programs, activities, and resources to try to develop more cheerleaders? Would you write that down? We're funneling this down now. Here's what I want to go after. Here's some of the things that maybe we already do that we could do even better for our cheerleaders. But how are we going to let them know about it so that they become bigger cheerleaders? Bottom of page 3. Daniela said they have museum pass programs, Linda access, and the fact that the library actually has video games and comics. So the question becomes, how do you get the word out even more? Nelson said most questions they asked was museum pass. We should provide more museums, more museum passes. Let more people know about it. Top of page 4. A little more like our basic content of a webinar. Don't give excuses for not being able to serve them better. At the end of the webinar today, I hope you're not going away saying, boy, I saw some things in there I liked, but our library will never do that. Surely there's something in here today you can kind of zero in on to make sure. Chris, I guess you're asking Nelson that, so I'll let you all or Daniela answer those questions in the chat box about museum passes or share your emails, and you might be able to, networking is part of what we do in our library world and in our webinars and so forth. That's why we have the chat so active, because that's networking, isn't it? Even though we're not face to face. So number 6 says, don't give excuses for not being able to serve them better. If there are policies and rules, try to figure out a way if those could be adjusted. If there's a budget crunch, is there somebody that could help you with that? Use it as an opportunity to listen to them to determine if something needs to be changed, like we talked about earlier with policies. Number 7 says, are you more interested in being right about your policies and rules or taking the opportunity to turn your patrons into cheerleaders? There's some people that take great pride in saying, we don't ever do that, or the rule says, or the policy is, and it's as if that makes them feel validated in the world. And really, we should be saying, I've never had anybody ask if we could do that. Let me check. Or I know that rule's been in place for a while. Let me see if we would reconsider. Or whatever it might be, to get those people to be your cheerleaders. And I know it's kind of corny the way I rephrased Kennedy's phrase, ask not what your patrons can do for you, ask what you can do for your patrons. Thanks, everybody, for helping Chris out with the museum information. I appreciate that. Okay, so we're winding down. What's one tip or suggestion or reminder that we've discussed today that you can start with, that's in big letters, to turn your patrons into your biggest cheerleaders? Please be specific. Would you write something into the chat that you went today? That's a light bulb moment. If we could do something similar to that, or if we could expand on this, or if we could focus more on this, I think we could turn our patrons into cheerleaders. What was that? And it's in the middle of page 4 for you. There you go, Abby. I'm going to just tell y'all, we all do this, not just in academic libraries, but we kind of assume what they'll want, don't we? Because we've been around the block for a few times here and we know what the library has to offer and how wonderful we are and all those kinds of things. And we can get a little bit tunnel visioned when it comes to that. So sometimes you just need to say, where's the gap? What are we missing here? What else would be helpful to you? Can't promise we'll do it, but certainly if we don't know what's needed, we'll never do it, right? That's what you're thinking of here. I know I have poured a ton of information out today. And I also want to reiterate that information is not transformation. So the fact that you attended a 90-minute webinar, we had a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much in the chat box. You all have been phenomenal. But that's not going to change anything, is it? Nelson said students want to play sports with other students so they can build friendships. Oh, that's a great idea too. What's one program or offering that your library offers that you think is unique? Just really different. This is an actual picture of a library, Whitehall Public Library. They have what's called a second chapter cafe. It's for older adults. You see a Keurig coffee pot there and Keurig K-cups and mugs and a lamp, right? What do you have? Maker carts. Thank you, Daniela. What do you have that's a little bit unique? Because somebody in the room may go, I never heard of that before. Here's another picture of the second chapter cafe. Lower back pain classes. Wow, that is really unusual and needed. And that's not just for older adults. I have one friend that's had lower back pain problems for decades. Yoga classes. I'm waiting for more answers. I love these answers. Everybody in here should have something that's a bit unique. Meditation programs, anime drawing. I hope I pronounced that right. I see it a lot, and I know what it is. I just don't know that I've ever heard anybody pronounce it. Thanks. Thanks, Daniela. Here's something I'm going to point out to you too. Yeah, I pointed out the lamp to you. There's also a plant there. Be aware of what your environment actually consists of. Is it warm and welcoming? Will people want to be there and be your cheerleaders because they feel good about the environment itself? And sometimes that's just a matter of going to a secondhand store, picking up a little coffee table that you can put a used lamp on, that you can put a little plant on, and putting your most comfortable chair beside it. Wanda said, I keep a plant at my desk. It makes a difference, doesn't it? Video games programs for kids. Lots of libraries now are doing gardens, community gardens, and then they harvest the garden and they have a nutritionist come in and make meals from that garden or suggest recipes from that garden. Book club kits, yes. Patrons can check out multiple copies of a title so that they can give them to all their book club, including on CD, as well as a discussion guide that prompts those discussions. Georgianne said puzzles and games. Seed libraries at many of our locations now. Besides museum passes, we offer passes for river cruise tickets, symphony tickets, kids' art classes. There you go. You're looking outside the walls of the library, aren't you? That's how you create cheerleaders. You know, the sports teams that have cheerleaders don't just play in their own gymnasium, do they? They have to go out. It's not a team. You don't need cheerleaders if there's no going out to it. STEAM activities, absolutely. U-media classes, 3D printing, gaming and music. All of the above. I'm exhausted, you all. You wore me out with all of your ideas, which I love. concerts. Now, here's the other thing. How are you going to make sure your community knows the value of your library on an ongoing basis? What can you do to do that? What are you doing that's unusual that somebody else in the room today might be able to use as far as promoting your library? When you promote it and more in your community know about it, you create more cheerleaders. How, Lena? How are you going to promote it? Aren't I pushy? You all know me well enough to know. Just trying to get you to be more specific for the people in the room. Advertise, advocate via social media. Advertisements, absolutely. And don't forget,
Thank you,
like I
Linda,
said, the
for an
coffee
informative
mats, the
webinar this
radio,
afternoon.
maybe there's a radio
Attendees, if you
station that would
enjoyed
do
this
public
webinar,
service
we ask that
announcements
you
or
join
whatever it
us
might
on June
be.
19th for Linda's next
I know
webinar.
we're running out of
Be a
time. I
manager and a
want to say
leader.
thank you
Positive people
again
equals positive
for
patrons.
all the
As
wonderful
always, we
ideas you've
encourage you to
had.
keep an
You
eye on the
all should
Swiftland
have enough
CE calendar,
ammunition
the
to go
Swiftland
out
Facebook
there and
page, or
help
your
your
message from the
patrons
listserv.
become your
Thank you,
biggest
everyone, for attending,
cheerleaders.
and have a great
Thanks,
rest of your
everybody.
day.
Hope to see you at the next session.
Thank you, Linda.